Hello, thank you very much for the comments. I thought I'd deal with some of those. My goodness, it's bitterly cold, isn't it? And Kenneth Keeling is one of many who talks about Lee Anderson. I was going to say Lee Harvey Anderson, but he doesn't have a Harvey. He isn't one of those triple-barreled people who assassinate American presidents. Lee Anderson. This guy makes me feel sick every time I hear him. Never mind, though he don't care when he loses his Ashfield seat. I'm sure GB News will have him full-time to spout his vitriolic clap trap. Well, there are many similar comments, and I was mindful of two people as I listened to Lee Anderson on television. Three people, actually, because I also picked up some comments from Mahyar Tousi, who is always worth listening to. You may think Mahyar and I don't share the same views. We don't, but I like him. And occasionally we exchange little messages, and it's always entertaining and always worth meeting Mahyar. And I think a demonstration that you don't have to agree with people in order to like them. And so, yeah, so I'll quote from Mahyar in a minute, but the two people who I was most thinking of was, number one, Andrea Leadsom, who's a person I don't like, and I had an opportunity of standing against her for her parliamentary seat. And in fact, I was offered an entire bundle of evidence, I was told, that would defeat her completely. And I read some of it, and I must say I was inclined to agree, but I thought this was information that was acquired illicitly, and I wasn't prepared to use it. Some of it has leaked out since, and some of it hasn't. And I'm certainly not going to be the person who deals the death blow. Andrea Leadsom, I think, was the author of her own misdoing when she stood against Theresa May. And the better person won. I don't like Theresa May either. And Andrea Leadsom, in the gay marriage debate, went into both lobbies, went into the yes and the no lobby, the aye and the nay lobby, and ridiculous. She voted twice. She voted for and against the bill. And then she went on television to explain why she had been so extraordinarily crazy, schizophrenic almost. The lobby is there for people who make a decision. So she was one person I thought of, because I felt that Lee Anderson was behaving in a sort of puerile way, rather like Andrea Leadsom. And the other person I thought of was Charles McKay, and he's somebody who came to mind. It was one of the positive moments in the rather dreadful two-series bit with Oliver Coleman in The Crown, the bit which was almost unwatchable. And there was a sequence there where Mrs. Thatcher and the Queen were having a sort of a get-together, and there was an audience, and the Queen the Queen was talking about grift, and that's all lack of stamina, and she was responding to Thatcher, and Mrs. Thatcher in return quoted Charles McKay. Now, he's slightly obscure. He was the editor at one point of the Illustrated London News. He was a Scottish poet from Perth. So a very apposite character for Mrs. Thatcher to quote back at the Queen, who had just returned from Balmoral. And the quotation is, you have no enemies, you say. Alas, my friend, the boast is poor. He who has mingled in the fray of duty, that the brave endure, must have made foes. If you have none, small is the work that you have done. You've hit no traitor on the hip. You've dashed no cup from perjured lip. You've never turned the wrong to right. You've been a coward in the fight. And I was also in that respect, I remember Bishop Callistos Ware, who was my tutor in Oxford, saying to me once, when you reach the age of 40, you realize that you have enemies, that people do not like you. And this may be a surprise. And indeed it was. And he was right. And it doesn't matter how much effort you make to be friends. You make enemies because you start to you start to deal with issues that perhaps others would prefer you didn't deal with, and you make decisions that people don't agree with, and people find it very difficult to distinguish between your point of view and yourself. And I've always tried to make a distinction between the two. So I may not like somebody's views, I may not like somebody's views deeply, but I may still like them. And every so often I point out somebody is quite a charming person or quite a clever person, and then I will say they've done something wrong, and people will say, but you just said that he was clever, or you just said she was clever, or she was charming. You can't have it both ways. Actually, you can. You make a distinction between the person and the thing they're doing, or the thing they're saying. And so I'd be quite happy. I know people seem to think that I really have it in for Nadine Dorries and Suella Braverman and Priti Patel and Robert Jenrick. I'd be quite happy to sit down and have a cup of tea with them. I'm sure they're all deeply charming and very amusing, very entertaining, very thoughtful. But wrong. I think no. I'm not going to pull punches and say you're right just because I'm having a cup of tea with you. You're wrong, sugar. And Mahyar Tousi, I think, gets this right as well. And he looks at Lee Anderson and looks at that piece of film where Lee Anderson said that I went into the No lobby and I talked to a friend there, and we were surrounded by these Labour people who were laughing at us. He says, Mahyar says, MPs are not supposed to be so thin-skinned, hurty words and offended and emotional by what other people in the Labour Party are saying. That's not leadership, says Mahyar. That's weakness. And, MPs were nasty to me. Now, Rishi has got my support because MPs in the Labour Party were nasty to me. That's what Lee Anderson is effectively saying. He's not a leader. He's a sheep, a snowflake. A thin-skinned individual who comes across as a bully and a thug on television. Well, he's welcome to be on television, but I hope the people in Ashfield think twice about re-electing him at the general election. I really hope this man loses his seat. Oh, and by the way, let's have a cup of tea. I'd be delighted to have a cup of tea because he seems at heart a vulnerable individual, but that's not a leader of a country. That's not a leader of a party. That's not a person I would elect as my MP. Oh no, but vulnerable individuals, line up. Let's have tea.